something happens within that nurturance and that gives that seed and that grows. Same for spiritual growth. And sometimes we're just hot, you know. Everything seems to have a meaning to it. And sometimes we're like, oh, God, another day. Or we might be somewhere in the middle. But no one can, you can't borrow. It's not one of those things that when Jesus comes for us, you can borrow from your partner or your friend. It has to be something that you steadily feed within yourself in a way that makes sense to yourself. In a way that makes sense, or learn another way, something that gives you that boost so that you know when you're around people what you're up against. It's like discernment. The gift of discernment tells us this: if it's of human, if it's of God, and if it's of evil. You know, that whole being, not every person that comes into our life is of good.
That's right.
Not everyone that comes into our life is of God. We've all been in that, sometimes both circles, and not everybody that comes into our life is not doing some other kind of practice that's keeping them away from what we call our faith. Causes destruction. You've been around people where every time they come in, it's a destruction everywhere. You know, as a pastor, you watch that in the flock. You watch for a sheep in wolf's clothing coming up in the middle, because that's how it works. It'll come up in the middle and just start to cause a little doubt. Get you on that negative run. Pretty soon you think, oh, I'm not going to get up this morning. Then pretty soon it gets easier the next day and the next day. And boy, it can be really challenging. You know, you can get so far out there that you're kind of too far from the vine.
Amen.
You know, you're just out of the very end of that, not getting the sustenance that we need. Okay, number 3, the parable of the bags of gold. The story was about his master that gave servant 5 bags of gold, one servant 2 bags of gold, and one servant 1 bag of gold, and went away. The servant with 5 doubled it. The servant with 2 doubled it. The servant with 1 buried it. And when the master returned, and the one that doubled the 5 says, look, you gave me 5 and I doubled it. He says, well done, faithful servant. I gave you a little, I'm going to put you in charge of a bunch. Same to the second. The first one came in and said, I knew you were shrewd. And so what I did was I buried it. What that means is God has given us all gifts and talents. And we're supposed to use them for the work of God. If listening is something we do well, then we use that in the work of God. If diaconate work, like making sure people have food in their houses, making sure that they've got heat going, making sure that they have a way to go to church, willing to handle, that loves to do the potluck kind of thing and likes to make sure that the table ministry goes on, those are gifts. Now, the gifts only work when they're given in and filled inside of us by the Holy Spirit. You can't deem them on yourself, you know what I mean? You just can't go and say, I want that gift. It's not like picking a present underneath the tree. You have to go in here. We go in here and see what God has given us. You know, we know that you know if you're a patient or an impatient person. You know, we know if we're kind or unkind. We know if we give people mercy and grace. We know when we judge them. We know what those gifts are. So the one had, and all of these were only given the gifts that they had. They were not given gifts that they didn't have. They didn't have more bags of gold put on them than they were able to handle. It was specific to each one. And one of them just said, I'm keeping it to myself. Long time. When we were back in the other little church, gosh, we had a gal who had such a gift in music. I mean, there wasn't anything she couldn't play. And when she got on that instrument, she made it sing. You know what I mean? She had that talent. I mean, I can remember when we got a Wurlitzer and she'd never done all the foot pedals. It took her about 15 minutes and she had that thing rocking. I love that organ. She could make those pipes sound wonderful instead of the ones, you know. I mean, she could rock it. But she had some demons that bothered her. Like, she liked to put her name on other people's checks.
Wow.
She had a little dishonesty in that. And you know, that stupid demon took her down. She's in prison. She had the gift, and it was the first time in my heart I had seen someone that had the gift bury it. She buried it, and we lost a lot of music in that. My prayer is that I hope she's playing all that stuff at the prison. Because I hope she's involved in the prison ministry and plays in the Sunday school. In their church services. I would love to know that. Wouldn't that make us feel good? Because we loved her. But I saw that. One other time I had someone that had been asked if they'd be on the board of directors. Said, no, I'll miss football on Sunday. I went, well, we got to tell God that one day. Sorry, I'm not coming up. I want to watch a game. So we all have gifts and talents. It's up for us to look inside and see the things that it's a talent, it's a gifted talent when it comes so easily. That's how you recognize it. Somebody will say, you are so kind. And you go, really? It just comes naturally through. So that was about the judgment of that, is to be sure whatever God has given you, you use to the glory of God. Matthew 25:31 through 46, the sheep and the goats. The king will say to those on the right, come, you are blessed by my parent, take your inheritance. The kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes or clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? Jesus says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did unto me. Amen. The sheep and the goats is about separating those that did their ministry and lived their life in this world. There's an account for how that happened. God will take account of how we treat others.
That's right. Amen.
God knows. It's not like Santa knows if you're naughty or nice kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? God takes account for us on what we've done, how we lived out our spiritual life with other people. When people leave us, do they feel better or worse? Do we drain their battery, or do we try to help fill it up? So, followers, be ready. Spiritual growth, be prepared. It's all on each one of us to do that. Use our gifts and talents to the service of God, not self. And take an account for how we treat others. Now, here's the good news. Holy crap, I fell off my horse at all of those. Y'all know what I mean when I say fell off my horse? Well, I had a horse that didn't like the saddle, so he'd blow up his gut. And I tightened that cinch down, and then he would pass gas as we walked. And as he passed gas, the saddle would get looser and looser, and he'd bring that belly down. Well, if I didn't jump down and take that cinch and tighten it up again, guess where I ended up? Off the horse, on my head. The whole saddle would be wet. You don't do that too much before you decide you better check it. So I could say, if I had to stand in front of God today, I would be totally human. I would have some successors. We would have some successes. And we'd have some failures. We'd have some attempts. And we have some things we just let go. And we'd have kindness towards humanity as well as selfishness. We stand before God, and we can only trust our belief that God is a just God, and that the judgment will be tempered with God's mercy and God's grace.
Amen.
That's the good news, is God is just. And God already knows that sometimes we foul up. Sometimes we think we have good intentions and we fall short. Saddle falls off the horse. We reconcile that to the best of our ability as fast as we can when we have something that's happened between a brother and a sister, our partners, our friends, our co-workers. I'd like to close with this story, and I'll just paraphrase it. It's called Simbala's Easter Story. Jim Cymbala preaches at a church in the slums of New York, and he tells the story. On Easter, when you go through Holy Week, it's a pretty strenuous week. It's kind of like going on a marathon. As a pastor, it'd be very equivalent to that. You have to train for it, and it can be hard work. And you're going through the whole thing, where you're rising to that place, and you're coming to Easter, and it just gets more intense and more intense. And by the time we get to Good Friday, we're in such sorrow. When we get to Good Friday, we realize just how much that costs us. We feel sorrowful about that. I do, because I know what's on that cross was part of what I did. The failures that I had, the attempts that I had. And so it's always sorrowful that time of year when I look at that, because I know when Jesus gets on that cross, there's a time where he cries out, oh my God, why have you forsaken me? Because God could not look upon the sin of the world and turned. And Jesus felt that. That's the sad thing about people not finding their faith, is that they'll not be with God. That's scary. So anyway, he's done. He felt like he delivered a good Easter sermon. He was tired, and he did a big altar call, and the people were up there, and all the counselors were praying for everybody, and he just went. So he sits down, and he unloosens his tie, and he's just sitting there, and all of a sudden he looks up, and there sits an old bum named David. Stinky who? And he's going, Lord, I'm tired. The homeless have a habit of coming here because they want money for whatever they needed. So I decided, well, I would just get the money out of my pocket and give him some money. And he walks up and he said, can I talk to you? He's got his money ready to give him. As he goes to give him the money, the guy says, I don't want your money. He says, I want that Jesus you're talking about. I want to have that. When he got it about 5 foot up to the pasture, the smell was horrible. And it smelled so bad that he was trying to breathe out of his mouth to the side and not take a breath in. And he was so focused on that, and he looks at him and he said, well, what's your name? And he said, David. He says, how long have you been on the street? And he said, 6 years. How old are you? He said, 32. He looked filthy, hair matted, front teeth missing, wino eyes and slightly glazed. Where'd you sleep last night, David? Oh, in an abandoned truck. So when I tried to take the money and hand it to him, he says, David said, I want that Jesus. And all of a sudden that pastor started to weep. Because here he was being called to do God's work with another human being, and he was going to pass it off for money for wine. He wasn't prepared or ready, and it broke his heart that God had given him the opportunity for someone that wanted a different life. And as he cried, pretty soon David started to cry, and they embraced. And those both meant they wept. They wept over the things that were deep in their soul. The preacher says, I learned from God that lesson that says, if you don't love this smell, I can't use you, because this is why I called you where you are. This is what you are about. You are about this smell. Christ changed David's life. He started memorizing portions of scripture that were incredible. They got him a place to live. They hired him at the church to do some maintenance. They got his teeth fixed. He was a handsome man when he came out of the hospital when they detoxed him after 6 days. Preacher says he spent Thanksgiving and he spent Christmas at my house. One time we were exchanging presents and he pulled out one little thing and he said, this is for you. It was a little white hanky. It was all he could afford. A year later, David got up and talked to the congregation about his conversion to Christ. And the minute he took the mic and began to speak, I said, that man's a preacher. That past Easter, this past Easter, we ordained David. He's an associate minister of a church over there in New Jersey. And I was so close to saying, here, take this, I'm a busy preacher. We can get so full of ourselves, and yet there stands God's mercy and grace reminded in a man named David.